Hi, everybody. Welcome to another inspirational interview here on Artful Minds. My name is Michael King. I'm the founder of Artful Minds, and your host tonight is June 19th, 2024, with Lori McNee. Before I start, I just want to mention that Artful Minds is my online educational community for artists. It's something I started just because I love teaching and I love seeing people progress. Think of it as a perpetual group mentorship program in a way, always there to provide support and guidance through educational posts, videos, and live sessions, showcasing demos, critiques, tips, and tricks, as well as one-on-one discussion. Our most popular event by far has to be the monthly critiques, where I take you step by step using Photoshop through all the changes so you don't just hear about how to improve your artwork, you actually see it. Our inspirational discussion tonight is with Lori McNee. Lori is an American artist hailing from the stunning central mountains of Idaho. She creates diverse artwork, including poetic studio landscapes, vivid plein air studies, elegant still life paintings, and wildlife art. Inspired by nature, Lori's art reflects her deep love for the great outdoors and magnificent creatures. Saying that, I will post her online presence into the chat. You can find her at lorimcnee.com, and on Instagram, her handle is Lori McNee Artist. So welcome, Lori. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thanks, Michael.
Excellent. Now, I want to just share my screen and I want to go through about a dozen or so photos of your paintings. And as I do that, can you just tell me how it all started?
Yes, I can. Oh, that's a fairly recent piece I did, probably 2 years ago. So I was a little girl growing up in Arizona and just had a love of nature, the outdoors. Gosh, it's hard just to look at these and not have something to say. But these are, for the most part, fairly recent. That's very recent. These are of the past 3 or so years that you're scrolling through. But anyway, I loved birds, especially. I grew up in Arizona and the first part of my childhood, and we lived in an old orange grove where we would irrigate the lawns instead of have a sprinkler system. And so once a week, they'd come in and flood the lawns. And Arizona is a birding mecca. And so once the water receded, all these birds would flock to the yard. And I just was so entranced by birds. And I tried to capture them. And there's an old wives' tale. You can sprinkle salt on a bird's tail and it can't fly. So I ran around trying to sprinkle salt on a bird's tail. It never worked. And finally, my mom handed me a pencil and paper and said, "Why don't you start capturing them on paper?"
Oh.
And so I started drawing with pencils and crayons and things. And I've been drawing ever since.
That's interesting.
So,
Usually it's not the parent
yeah.
that initially starts the kids down their path. It's usually the kid who just jumps in and never lets go kind
Well,
of
I
thing, right?
loved art. I used to doodle and stuff, but I wanted to be outside. So I enjoyed kind of the naturalist side of it. So it was really fun to start drawing and becoming a little wildlife artist right from the start.
No doubt. So have you gotten
Yeah.
back to Arizona to paint there as well, or is it primarily just Idaho?
So I lived there until I was 12 years old, and then we moved to back. I was born in LA originally, and then my parents moved to Arizona for work reasons, and it was hard to leave. I loved it. It was magical for me. A lot of Native American relics, and we used to go out in the desert and look for pottery shards. And back then, there was 100,000 people back then in Scottsdale, and it's so much different now. But then we moved to San Diego, and that was quite different, faster pace, Southern California, but it was a unique experience. And I'd lived there up until I got married, and then we moved up to Idaho. So I've been in Idaho for a long time now,
Yeah,
since
for sure, right? No,
85.
that's fantastic. Beautiful country
Yeah.
though, I'm sure, right?
It's beautiful. I
Yeah,
love it. I moved up here sort of reluctantly, but my goodness, it's a blessing. I love it so much.
that's funny, hey.
Yeah, it's very
Now,
inspiring.
now we can see from your artwork behind you, and I'm
Yes.
glad you have it up because it's perfect. I don't have to share my screen again. It has a very consistent tonal quality, no matter all your work on your website does. Occasionally, you have a few with some strong notes of color and whatnot, but very
Right.
tonal and colored grays. And have you always painted this way, or is this something that you've shifted into in the last few years?
You and I were chatting for a few moments beforehand, and I was saying that, we're always evolving, and that's what I love about art is we can keep growing with age and keep evolving. And for me, I get sort of bored with certain things. So so I started as a wildlife artist back in the 80s, and I worked with some of the most renowned artists, including Robert Bateman. He was a mentor of mine, and he's from your neck of the woods.
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, I learned, how to render birds and animals from him, and a handful of other really well-renowned wildlife artists back in the 80s. So I did a lot of that. And I was telling you, back then I was a young mom and I had babies that took up all my time for the most part, but my art was still important to me. And so I would paint late into the wee hours of the morning, or during nap time, or, during loads of laundry, that sort of thing. And I would put my art into, to keep me motivated, different competitions like the trout stamp and the duck stamps and things like that. Kept me motivated. I did posters for people, and that was where I started. And so I was really captivated by realism, like many artists are, especially early on in their careers. Capturing the likeness of something it's a good feeling to be able to technically be able to do that. And so I really loved doing that. But then as I did that for many years, I kind of became bored with it and got tired of painting just strictly from photographs. And that's where I discovered plein air painting. And that works well for me because I love to be outside as well. And it completely helped evolve my work. I took a workshop with Robert Moore, who is an Idaho artist and very diverse, and he paints much differently than I do. But I learned a lot from him. And so that took me on a whole nother trajectory, and it did influence the direction of my work. And it's been evolving over the past few years, even. So I'm more concerned at this point, not concerned, that's not the word. I don't mindful, or my own personal goals is to work to simplify whatever I'm painting. First of all, my subject's usually light, and then the design is important to me. So I'm really wanting to simplify my shapes and keep my value fairly close, and becoming more sophisticated with my sense of color, limiting my palette and things like that. So those are ways that I've been evolving and adding some abstraction and deconstruction to my work. And that gets me really excited right now. So
That's
I don't
fantastic.
know if I answered it.
Oh,
but...
it does. Yeah.
Okay.
The fact that you have limited palette and whatnot, and a few other things in there, tells me exactly why I see a lot more tonalism in your work compared to like other artists, right, who rely on color, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. You have to be one of the first artists that are just like me, in that you got tired of realism and were bored with it, and you wanted to shift away from it, and you magically made that hard work happen, right? It takes a lot of effort to jump out of realism, doesn't it?
It does. And one of the things that really helped me out, it's been about 10 years ago, I decided to put my paints aside for a little bit. And I took, my oil paints, and I started learning how to do encaustic wax painting. And yes, and it's so funny because I quickly became very recognized in that world. And I'm even in this museum when I was a novice with some of my art, because I still did my birds, and you can find it on my website under probably mixed media or encaustic. I can't remember in the portfolio, but I really love encaustic, and I will go back to doing some of it. I haven't for the past few years because of my studio situation, because it is toxic, and I'm all about solvent free with Lori McNee, but it is a toxic medium, and you have to have really good ventilation. But I loved what it did for me, and you can't control the wax, really. I mean, very little. And so it's helped me become less rigid and open to surprises, and what I might think would be a mistake turns into something really beautiful. And so I got really excited about that. And then I also took some private instruction with an artist who is a contemporary painter, more of a modern type artist, and mixed media. And I worked with him for many months, and he had me bring in all kinds of different tools and mixing, using some acrylic with the oils, which you got to be careful about, but there's ways to do it. And it helped me so much, I can't even tell you. And so it really got me out of my little box, and I'm still on that trajectory right now, is where I am. I get really excited about it.
Yeah, you really jumped deep end right into it. That's fantastic. And probably the
Yeah.
only way really to do it in a sense. Otherwise, you might stick with the realism for longer.
Well, and I love realism, don't get me wrong. But there's people that are so good at it, you
Mm.
know? And I did animals very well, but I have had, I'll tell you what, I honestly got tired of counting feathers, is what I say. And so, what I mean by that, when you're doing real traditional wildlife art and you're doing ducks or birds, and you have to be accurate in that world of realism because there's hunters, there's fishermen, there's, ornithologist types that are going to buy your work and collect it. And they seriously count the feathers. And when you're in those competitions, they count the feathers and make sure that they're all there. And I got, no offense, everybody. For me, I got tired of it. It stifled me a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I have fun now creating the essence of the animal, the essence of the bird, and getting more into that aspect of it rather than the actual,
Yeah, the nitty
everything
gritty where you were.
perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned plein air painting, and thank you for that. It changed my trajectory, and in a way, my life. What drew you to plein air painting, and why do you continue to do it today?
Well, again, being outdoors, I'm an outdoors girl and got me out of my studio. What I got really excited about, I also love photography and I'm a pretty good, maybe a step above novice. I mean, I'm intermediate, but if I wasn't a professional painter, I would probably go that route with photography because I enjoy it a lot. However, and now I know that HD photography and all of that has really helped, but for the most part, we lose a lot in photos. I use photos for reference, but as any painter knows that does that, your lights get blown out, your darks are usually too dark, and you try adjusting it, and you lose the color. If you oversaturate, you just lose the nuances that you can get when you're outside. You just don't understand what you're painting unless you experience it. That's how I feel about it, at least. I'm looking out my window right now, daydreaming, and it's very summery out there right now. It's not like this back here, but it's just so wonderful to get out there and experience plus the time constraints. It makes you spontaneous and
Mm,
you can't get bogged down in the details as much, and you have to move quickly and capture what the essence of that place is right there, get the spirit of the place.
absolutely.
And I love all that. And it's a challenge, it's a sport. It is
Mm.
actually one of the most exhausting things. Just schlep all your work out there and deal with bugs and the wind and just trying to walk around and find the place you want to paint. It's an event, but I love the challenge.
Absolutely.
And it
It's
and it brings
mentally,
a
it's
lot back for us to the studio.
yeah, absolutely. It's a real
Yeah,
mental push, isn't it?
it truly is.
Yeah.
It is.
Now with that and what you just said, I want to bring up Rocky Mountain Aspen Glow here, or Alpine Glow that you did. And it has such a rawness and an immediacy to it. There's the light, it needs to go down, but I got to put the trees
Yes.
in first. So I threw in the trees, and then there's some strokes over the trees, and it's like, yes, that's it. That's the color, that's the light to the next. And you can
Yes.
see the scraped canvas, you can see where it's pulled out. And I can see and I understand why this is all like that because it was a decisions, bang, 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 bang.
Yep.
And it has this innate beauty to it that you can't get in studio pieces, or I've never been able to replicate, right? And so I
Well,
guess the
thank you.
hard
That's
question for
true.
me is what you prefer. Do you prefer this rawness out of from plein air painting, or do you like the more refined studio work?
Oh, I'm a Gemini, and that's what you're noticing with me. I like it all. So I love this little piece. It was a really, some pieces are just a joy to paint, and that was one of them, and that's from Colorado. And it just came together effortlessly. Other times, like childbirth, they take longer, but and with plein air, sometimes you paint a frisbee, right? They don't all turn out. So, but that's part of the charm of plein air painting and what we learn from it so much. But I love the studio work. I love studio painting as well. But that's where I am right now, Michael, is trying to keep certain areas of my painting feeling raw and feeling like you can see the trace of the steps of creating this painting. I don't want to cover everything. I want to leave a little bit of the ghost under there and let people kind of look. And to me, that's interesting is when I go to a gallery or museum, you can usually always tell a painter or an artist, they're always up close, nose up to the canvas, trying to decipher how did they do that, and so I want to try and create something that people look at and go, wow, how'd she do that? And look at this interesting layer. And what's interesting, I think it comes with life and maturity too, because I look at my work from previous years and it didn't have that depth. It didn't have, I mean, I still appreciate what I was doing back then, but now I feel like it's a little bit more raw and open, but there's still layers and things you can't quite figure out. But then again, look, she's really open over here. It's kind of like me. So I'm striving to get that freshness in my studio work, yet my studio work definitely is more refined. That's true.
Yeah. I think all our studio work is more refined just because it's the
Yes.
studio, right? But
Yes.
saying that, you have your plein air studies or paintings, however you look at it, and sometimes you'll take it in the studio and you'll upscale into a studio piece from the plein air. But do you rely just on the plein air in your memory, or do you start pulling out the photos to see what you can add or what you missed?
Well, I do usually use reference material as well, but I'm getting more bold to kind of, it's a challenge, don't you think?
Absolutely.
For those of us that have come from the realism world, we feel, very much like we have to be looking at our subject to paint it or create it. And so I'm really enjoying using those studies and then my own feelings and the memories and that sort of thing. And then thinking about the design and how can I improve the design from these studies. And then, yes, I might need to pull up a picture or two, but it's a combination of those elements that go into my current body of work nowadays.
Yeah, it's always tempting to try to rely on a photo, but it's just more satisfying when you can just think in terms of design and how to build a painting for the sake of the painting rather than having the naughty word of a reference photo beside you, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I might as well jump into this too. Because you're such a big educator, you have your blog forever, and now you're solvent free with Lori McNee. I can't believe I just said that. What was the choice? Like, it's great that you're ambassador for the Cobra oils, and if anybody's interested in water soluble oils, Lori's probably the blog that you want to hit up first, just to read over everything and to see how it all works, really. But then, how did you get into it besides just wanting to say, "Oh, I want to do solvent free"?
Right. So, as I was mentioning, I was a wildlife painter and still am, but the traditional sense of it. And back when my kids were home, I wanted to keep my home solvent free way back then. And so I didn't use terps or anything. I was an acrylic painter. So I painted with acrylics, which so many wildlife artists do and did back in the 80s and 90s. And that's primarily what I did. But when I discovered plein air painting and I wanted to get outside, back then they did not have open acrylics. And I do know a few fabulous acrylic painters that paint plein air with traditional acrylic paints, but they dry so quickly and it didn't work for me. So I discovered water mixable oils way back then in the 90s. And I started using Grumbacher Max was the first one. And I used them for many, many years. And then I went to the first plein air convention. I've been to all of them, but I missed this last one. It was such a bummer. So I started, I went to the plein air convention in Vegas and I met Kyle Richardson. He's with Cobra and we just hit it off right away. And he introduced me to Cobra and he knew of me because I'm of my blog and all my Twitter and all the things, being a social media personality for all these many years. And so we struck up a friendship and I was their first ambassador and I've been working with them for all these years. That's Royal Talons North America now is the name of his company. And then I'm also an ambassador for Royal Talons International.
Wow.
And I truly believe in the brand and everything they make and the people behind it. They're fabulous and they care about our environment and everything they make, including the traditional things. They do their best to have them be good for everybody.
That's fantastic. I have so many
Yeah.
questions about ambassadorship, but I won't bring them up here. Maybe I'll DM you
Okay.
later. But
Sure.
I do want to talk about your whimsical side of your work because you have a lot of plein air stuff. You have a lot of landscapes, but since you were a wildlife painter, you also have a little more whimsical pieces, and I just want to bring those up.
Well, so while you're doing that, I can jump in from the wildlife era that I was in. And then I went into landscape and plein air. Oh, that's one of my older pieces. That's a lot older. I want to repaint some of these things that I see.
You're
I'm like,
welcome.
why are you showing this? No, I'm kidding. It's funny. This one's not that old. This one is probably 5 years old. But anyway, my still life started because I love the Dutch painters. They're an influence of mine. And I love their still life. And again, I was kind of back in that realism where I wanted to capture things, but I wanted to not make them perfectly realistic. So, and I also loved birds and animals. So I wanted to add life to the still life. And that's kind of where that has come from. And so I've just enjoyed that. And my work has been evolving, and my newer still life pieces they're not as realistic. I don't have any of my most recent. I have a commission, so I'll post that pretty soon. But yeah, I wanted to add life to the still life. The Dutch usually added dead animals and things, and I decided, well, it kind of harkens back to my days as a little girl in Arizona, too. When the little birds I'd try and capture, sometimes they'd hit windows and I'd save birds a lot. There was a lady in town called the Bird Lady. And sometimes when I couldn't nurse them back to health, we would take them to the Bird Lady. She had this home where she had cages of these birds that she would rehabilitate, but sometimes she had one that she was not able to let go in the wild. And one was a little hummingbird, and she always kept it out. It couldn't fly, and she kept it on a bouquet of flowers, and she'd feed it nectar. But it was just this little magical thing. But she had it on, it was like one of my still life paintings. It was a bouquet of flowers and a little hummingbird. And
No
so
doubt. That's amazing.
yeah, so that when I started painting still life and wanted to add birds, that was like this latent memory to me. And I know that's where it came from. And so, influence from my childhood.
Yeah,
So
okay. And
that's where that's coming from.
you obviously still enjoy the whimsical sides.
I do.
Yeah.
And right now, I have a current exhibition going on right now at Nealon Gallery in Sun Valley. I've been working on the exhibition for about 9 months, and there's 15 paintings in there. And I would say half are birds and the other half are landscapes. And the birds right now are I didn't do any still life for this one, but they're birds with, I don't know if you pulled up any of those, but they're more contemporary. I've had so much fun creating these interesting textures and backdrops for my birds. Then I try and integrate them in, so much more abstract and whimsical for me, playful, yet the colors are, because of my choice in, they're tonal still much, but I do pop color some. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing them on your stories, but
Yes.
I don't necessarily remember them in my head
No,
right
that's
now.
okay.
Yeah, everything's
Yeah.
a blur with social media, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it all goes quickly.
nice. That's your show with one of your galleries, and so I want to ask you about your galleries. Do you ever find yourself painting for your galleries, or you just paint what you want to paint and approach your gallery and say, "This is what I want to have for a show," or how does all that work for you?
So I'm really blessed that the galleries that I have believe in me, and they, two of which I've been with for over 20 years, and they know me, they know my personality, they know that I'm always trying something new, and they're really good sports with it. And so rarely do they ask and request for something, but every now and then I've painted the Sun Valley Red Barn many times. So yeah, sometimes you do get into that a little bit, but for the most part, I'm painting what I love. And because I think when you do that, it takes your work to another level and it just comes through. And I believe that it connects with people more on a heartfelt, emotional level, that if you're painting for them, it's almost like there's something lost in the translation. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be done, but if you feel like for instance, I have a gallery in North Carolina and they love my bears. But see, I love to paint bears. So he said, Lori, for August, can you paint me some new bears? Well, I'm excited about that. So I can do that. But if I didn't love bears, maybe that wouldn't be my right place. So I kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's good to hear. Such a great fit with everybody.
Yeah.
Now, when you first got into your first gallery, whatever that experience was like, did it push you and elevate your work again? That one little jump in?
Sure. I think anytime you make a change and add something more to your repertoire, whether it's another show or a new tube of paint or whatever, I mean, it's a butterfly effect where it all changes. Yeah, it's all part of the growth of yourself as an artist, for sure.
Was it pretty exciting though when you got into your first gallery?
Yes. So it was actually Neyland Gallery in the 80s when I moved up to Sun Valley, and I was busy being a mom, but I mainly drew. I painted with those acrylic paints, and I would enter those competitions I mentioned, the duck stamp, trout stamp, all that. But I drew a lot. I drew with pencil because that's what I always had done. And Neyland Gallery saw them. I can't remember. I was doing some illustrations for like Nature Conservancy or something. And so they wanted to represent me, which they did for a very short time, but it was too premature for me. I had kids and I couldn't keep up, and I just was not prolific enough. So back in 2000, I picked up Kevin McPherson's book. What one? How to
Everyone
paint,
knows that one, right?
Yeah, how to paint light, whatever that one is, right?
Yeah.
It's just you asked me about books, and that's one I would recommend if you're a plein air painter. It's just such a good one, and he just did such a good job with that. It was simplifying it all. But anyway, he challenges you in there to paint, I believe, 106 by 8 paintings.
That's right.
And it was one summer, and I still had kids at home, but they were getting older, and I was driving to soccer and ice skating and things. So I bought a little tiny, no, I didn't. It was back when I made my own cigar pochade box. And I took that with me, and I had my ex-husband cut 6 by 8s for me. And I was bound and determined, while they're out there playing soccer or whatever they're doing, I'm going to do one painting. And I sat there and I'm glancing at them. Oh, nice job. And I'm painting. And I don't know, I'd paint a park bench. I'd paint, a tree in front of me, whatever. At the end of summer, I had 100 paintings. And a friend came over, and she was in my studio. She came over for another reason, and she happened to notice all these paintings everywhere. She goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I told her." And she said, "Lori, I have a furniture store, and I would love it if you framed these. Let's give you a show." I said, "Are you kidding me?" She goes, "No, I want to do it." And it was strategically located on Gallery Rose, so it was kind of cool. I framed them all up, and then I put one little still life I had done with a little bird on this vase, and that was my very first still life with a bird, the very first one I ever did. And I had a sellout show. Before they took them down, I ran to Neyland Gallery and I said, "Hey, hi, you don't remember me, but I used to be here in the 80s, and would you come next door and look at what I've been doing? I just sold everything." And Carrie, my director, came down and she goes, "Oh my gosh, okay, done. We want you." And it was perfect. So that's how I got into, my first real gallery.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. And there's no better precursor than saying, "Can you come look at my show? They've all sold, but..."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it was
every gallery's
cool.
best dream, right? I mean, that's fantastic.
It was, and it was really neat for me too.
That's fantastic.
So,
I love that.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, and they're like family to me.
Yeah, you've been there for so long, for sure, right? Yeah.
Yes.
That's great.
Definitely.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I just have one lined up, and it's all about broken color. And it's very handy that you have that piece behind you again, because it has a lot of broken color in it. And I want to ask you, even though you're very toneless, so broken color can help a lot in that you're not relying on just color and chroma. How important do you think it is for artists to understand and use broken color in their work?
Well, it's all personal taste, obviously. I think that I got influenced for many years. I had the opportunity to teach workshops in France, and I had the very unusual and wonderful experience of teaching in Monet's gardens, where I was able to take a group of painters and for a week, every morning and every evening, before and after opening and closing, we were allowed by ourselves with the gardeners painting in Monet's gardens. And I learned a lot about broken color by being around him. Even though he wasn't there, he was there for me. And I did that for about 5 years. It influenced me, even though I really don't paint like him, which you don't want to paint like somebody anyway, but it still influenced me a lot. And I love that you see me that way, because I have a hard time even seeing it. And so, because mine's more subtle in comparison to somebody like the Impressionists, because their broken color was almost more systematic in a way, and their strokes were more of the same size, whereas mine it's more random, I think. And I think the broken color is also part of me adding texture. And so I'm not thinking about as much broken color as I am about creating the interest of warm against cool tones, and certain areas keeping the values very close, but changing the temperature shifts. When I started to learn how to do those things, that's when in my opinion, my art started to take a leap in sophistication, when I really started to understand warm against cool, and again, understanding value and that sort of thing. So the broken color, I think that you're recognizing there, is me doing my best to create that, as well as create texture. And I think that inadvertently is a form of broken color. But thank you. I had to call my girlfriend because you mentioned that to me in an email, and I'm like, she and I are critique buddies, and I'm like, he said I do use a lot of broken color, and do you see me like that? Because she's been painting with me for over 20 years. She goes, you do, Lori. I'm like, oh, okay. So
Well,
that's
it's
cool.
just,
Thank you.
oh,
I
absolutely. And
appreciate it.
oh, for sure. And like, I don't know, this interview is kind of surreal for me because in some ways we're so alike, because I've always explained broken color as temperature shifting in the same value. And
Oh,
that's
good.
it changed everything. Just like Plein did, it
Yes.
changed my life, changed my trajectory. And I've been saying that. You go back to some of my interviews, that's how I refer to it.
Oh,
But then
how
I noticed a
cool.
trend. A lot of people was talking about broken color. So I said, okay, maybe people understand broken color more. And then you come along and tell me, do I use broken color?
Yeah.
So I thought that was so funny, man. We're more
I
similar
know.
than, oh,
Oh,
that's
oh, I love
fantastic.
that.
That's
That's
great.
wonderful to know.
Man,
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who
Yeah.
thinks in temperature then. That's great.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm all about right
Yeah,
now.
for sure. Now, because we're
Yeah.
talking about color, this question came in early, and I like it because it doesn't talk about what colors you use and stuff like that, but it just asks you, what's your favorite mixed green?
Oh, I saw that come through.
Yeah, and I find it
So,
interesting.
yeah. So I like to mix my own greens a lot, but that doesn't mean I don't sort of cheat sometimes
You got
too.
to add that caveat in there, do you?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's so many ways to mix green, and I saw that question over there coming through. I'm like, oh, how do I answer that? But green is probably the most personal color for people. Like, if you go look at a plein air show, artists, you can recognize them by the greens they mix. And it's really interesting. Some are more acidic and some are more muted and tonal. And it's just very interesting. So I usually have ultramarine blue on my palette, or cobalt, sometimes cerulean. And it depends. It depends which blue, and if I'm using more than one blue. And that goes back to our warm and cool. This is where you kind of get into the science of color a little bit. And in my pigments that I use, let's say ultramarine is warmer than cobalt. And so I would use cobalt to mix greens with, I don't know, I could mix it again, it varies. It depends. Do I want yellow ochre on my palette, or do I want to use a cad lemon and mix my own yellow ochre? And then, so there's so many ways to do it. I'm more of an intuitive painter, quite frankly. And I know that I set my palette ahead of time. I do that. And And I've learned that from Skip Whitcomb. And he suggests picking your palette and doing some color swatches ahead of time so you understand what your palette is going to do. And so that's what I do. And then sometimes I might choose a warmer blue or a cooler blue. And then I will, if I use any green, it's permanent green deep, and it is a Cobra paint, and it's closely related to Viridian. We didn't have Viridian, but I believe that's now newly released, that we do have Viridian. But I know how to use my permanent green deep, so I'm going to stick with that. So when you're first starting out, I think it's better to keep green off your palette and mix your own greens. And so the easiest, let's just say you want a limited palette, just do ultramarine blue, and I use cadmiums. I know I'm solvent free, and cads have a little bit of lead, but these are AP, they're approved, not cautionary label. So, but I still am very mindful when I use them, but I like them because I don't like the manufactured yellows and reds and all as well. So I'm not really answering that very well, am
I was
I?
going to say you skirted that question very well, but you did say though, and I like this. You said you're more of an intuitive painter in terms of your intuitive mixing. However, I'll add something to that. You're well informed. You spent years mixing greens, and you know how to mix what blues with what yellows and how to adjust it to what you want.
Definitely.
So
Yes.
when she says intuitive, it isn't that I just go by where the wind takes me. No, it's informed decision. So just paint, paint, paint.
Yes.
And you'll find out what your go-to green is. I mean, it'll just evolve. Everyone's different, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I would suggest, if you're struggling with greens out there, someone said they're thanking me for that. I'm glad someone made sense of what I was trying to say. I would start with a limited palette and just honestly go get some cheap canvases or cheap oil paper, whatever, and take a day and have fun and experiment. Don't worry about it being all in little squares and tire yourself with measuring little grids off. Just do piles of paint and then make little notes by them and just say, oh, this, I love this green. This is cobalt and cadmium yellow medium, or oh, this was cerulean and yellow ochre, and try that. And then you're going to be able to make your own sap greens, and you can probably take green off your palette unless you want to use it.
Yeah, it's
That's what
the
I
more
would
you do
do.
it, the more, yeah, it's more freeing, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
And then once you realize that all pigments have a bias, it just changes that everything entirely, right? I mean, you kindly briefly mentioned mark making, and we did see it in the plein air piece, but that was just on the fly. But how important is mark making? Do you find yourself intentionally making a mark, a scratch, a pull or push with paint intentionally compared to just painting, if that makes sense?
Yes. I am so excited about mark making. So going back 10 years ago when I was taking some lessons with that abstract painter, and I said, I want to learn how to paint abstract paintings. So many people poo-poo abstract painting and go, oh my God, that's not real art. And some of it isn't. I totally agree. However, I look at it and I'm mystified half the time. Like, how can they even think like this? And so I was so scared. He had me have a big canvas. He just laughed at me and he goes, I want you to put some color notes down, just have fun. And we were doing acrylic. So, okay. And then what I like about acrylic, it dries quickly, and, and you can paint over it if you need to or whatever. And then, okay, what do I do next? What is this? Well, what do you think? I don't like it. Okay. So start responding to it. So he just had me responding to each mark I was making. And that was a huge, I still didn't get it then, but I get it now. Now that I'm incorporating mark making into my own work and what I want it to look like, I'm having so much fun understanding what it means to respond to a mark. And yes, that's definitely what I'm doing. And I took the abstraction and those lessons, and I went to a dear friend and another mentor, Michael Workman, who is a fabulous landscape painter. And I think he's one of the best in the world, really. If you look him up, Michael Workman, you'll love him, Michael. He's out of Utah and he's highly regarded. He's an artist type. but he's not real mainstream. He's I do believe he's on Instagram, and you'll see him a little bit, but he's very reluctant. He's very under the radar. But I've taken some, what did he call them? Master workshops with him. I've been with him and worked under his wing. And he is a realist, but he also abstracts things. And he's influenced my work a lot. And I don't paint like him again, but he does a lot of mark making and he does a lot of deconstructing. So those two things are what I'm really excited about. And I wish you could see my new body of work because it's a lot of fun. I'm proud of it.
Oh, you should be. Yeah. I mean, a lot of time and work goes into all those paintings, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about abstract painters, and I've said this to other artists, and because based on my experience, I poo-pooed abstract for the longest time, probably because of my ignorance, but I'm willing to accept that. And I sought out the good abstract art. And I think
Yes.
if you can find a good abstract artist in your area or within a couple hour drives that does workshops, it's worth the weight in gold to take that workshop because they think in terms of design and composition more so than, say, a landscape painter would. And then be prepared to be turned on your head and start rethinking everything, right? Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I'm making a note. You jogged my memory on something. I'm like, oh, I need to do this later. Yes, I totally agree. So many artists are wonderful artists that we all know and respect and regard, and the ones throughout history have studied different forms of art. And in fact, like Monet, he was a huge collector. And in his home, anybody that's been in his home will see that he's got all these Asian woodblock prints on his walls because they were the Asian, Japanese, and Chinese as well, all the Asian art. Wonderful designers. And so you can look for things like that, or maybe go look just for their mark making. I love Rothko's paintings. Rothko, many of as landscape artists love his color fields that he did. And then a woman named Marcia Myers, who has now since passed way too soon, but she did fresco painting, and she was very much inspired by Rothko. And she did these giant, beautiful frescoes of color fields, color blocks. But what she did is she kind of, to me, took his work to the next level and made him look like, when I travel in Europe, we all love those old walls that have these textures and, they feel so old. And again, you can see the trace of history in just a few square inches. And so she was able to get that into her work. Well, that influenced me. Even though I paint nothing like her, I want my landscapes and my bird paintings to have some of that in them. And so that's what I'm getting really excited about, is that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and some of the paintings that I showed that were whimsical and it had the birds in it, you could tell your background, to me, once you said encaustic, was influenced by that.
Definitely.
I'm sure, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was a big pivotal point for me, is encaustic and cold wax. I use cold wax a lot. And I saw someone mention cold wax over here, and I love cold wax. And I think it brings a whole nother variety of texture. And I don't know, it just makes things mysterious feeling. I really love what it does.
Yeah, I've only played with cold wax, so
it's cool.
Yeah, I brought it out, was intimidated, put it back.
It can be. Just play with it again. Just find something and don't make it look like anything. Just play with the cold wax and paint, and just don't worry about if it's going to look like anything good. Just
for sure.
Have fun.
Experience, right?
Yeah.
Put the time in, more or less. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, in terms of your studio work, I'm curious how you work. With plein air, you have the advantage of doing the plein air first and not wanting to uplarge it and stuff like that. But when you do your still lifes or just landscapes in your studio, how much planning goes into them? Is there a lot of sketches? Do you do preliminary studies, color studies, compositional studies before you reach the big piece?
So still life, I always paint from life. So I always have, and I haven't been painting still life for over 3 years much, maybe just a few, because I'm in my temporary studio while my main place is under construction. But still life, I like to actually have it to my left, and I have a shelving system. And so I own all the props and everything. So I enjoy still life because, again, it's painting from life and it's not from photographs. And that's much like plein air painting. And that's what I get excited about still life about, And except outside, Mother Nature's in charge, but inside we get to create our own universe, and we get to be the sun, and we can control all the elements. And so that's what's really nice about still life, but you still can learn so much about light and shadow that you can bring to your landscape painting and design and that sort of thing. So what did you ask me? Where was I going with this?
I was going to say, so the answer must be yes. No, do you do a lot of studies, preliminary work, watch designs?
So that's what I do with my still life. And then, yes. And so I tell you what, I create in my head a whole lot.
Interesting.
And I hike a lot. And that's when I paint in my head. And I start conceptualizing in my head what I want it to look like. And then I do use reference, especially with birds. I will use reference material. And then I pick out my palette ahead of time. I know what, now back in the old days, I didn't. Back in the old days, I just had I have a beautiful set of paints by Cobra. Okay. They're the Lori McNee signature set. And those are primarily my go-to paints that I use. But that doesn't mean every single time I paint a painting, I'm going to use every single tube of paint. Out of that plethora of beautiful 10 colors, I believe it is, I'll pick probably 4 and then mix it up. And then I'll have others that I'll bring in as well, because gosh, it's like candy, right? So it's fun and it keeps our work interesting. But I create in my head a lot. And then for landscape, that again has to do with my plein air studies, not always, but it usually does, and photographs. And I'll do sketches, but oftentimes I've already created in my head that I almost jump in. However, over the past few years, I'm getting more into dynamic symmetry. And so that's a whole nother conversation.
That. Oh, 100%. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
We're twins here. I don't understand this at all. Oh my gosh.
So I'm even just super excited about the Baroque diagonal and, keeping things like this. This painting's backwards. I don't know why it's on there backwards, but anyway, I'm excited about moving my eye through things. Sometimes I will make arrangements on my canvas first I'll maybe tone my canvas and then I snap some lines across it. And I always decide where my horizon is, where center is. I either intentionally will put something there or I go off. And that's when I use the dynamic symmetry to keep it interesting and organized.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now,
I ramble, you guys. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Now, to put you down a rabbit hole, you might find a lot of value in indirect subdivision by Andrew Loomis. And I've gone into that too.
Yes.
And, I use it a lot because I can sketch with it. Whereas the dynamic symmetry, I find I have to stop, plan, resketch. But the informal subdivision, I can kind of use it as I go, right? Yeah. It's very similar in sense, but it's also quite different. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll revisit that. I haven't looked him up for a while, so I'm writing it down.
Now, rejection, though, you've been painting a long time, and with it comes entering shows, entering all these other things. How did you handle rejection, or how do you handle rejection now?
It hurts. It never gets easy, but you get thicker skinned about it, and it's just kind of part of the business. And, any successful person in any field has had more rejection than success. And it's just the way it is. And art, we just put ourselves out there. And so it feels, it hurts because you feel, a lot of people know if you're rejected and that's your peers and that sort of thing. But it's part of the gig. And that doesn't mean you have to do competitions and you don't have to do exhibitions like juried exhibitions and that sort of thing. You can avoid some of that, but even getting rejected with galleries, that's a form of rejection. Anytime you put yourself out there, you're going to deal with naysayers, and art is subjective. And so we're all going to deal with it, and you learn to toughen up, and this is just part of it. I have some very dear friends that are very high up in their field and they deal with rejection a lot. And it's just a girlfriend just recently. I mean, she's master level and she got rejected out of some thing we all are a part of. And it was shocking. It's just, we laugh. You just,
You just
okay.
never know, right? I
Yeah.
find it very reassuring, and it makes me smile,
Yeah.
not in a derogatory way
No,
that you got
but
rejected, but it's
it's,
like it still happens, and that's
yes, it
fantastic, right?
does. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of politics involved too, you guys. I'm sorry to say.
Hmm.
There are. So,
Yeah, the more
yeah.
people you know, the better. Trust me.
That and
Yeah,
sometimes that works against you at times too.
true.
Sometimes you can oversaturate the market. So
What are you saying, Laurie?
it happens. So
Oh, that's so funny.
yeah.
All right, this has been fantastic. We're coming near the end, so I got two more questions for you.
Okay.
And I ask these for everybody because I always find it really interesting, and hopefully they can be different answers. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So that's a hard one because there's business advice, there's, artistic advice
That's
and
true.
all of that. So I would say my dad, my mom as well, but my dad was a very astute businessman and he taught me to be sure to look at my career as a business. And so many artists forget that component. And I think that's where I've been able to help others in my own little way. And, I, with my blog over the years and social media, training people back in the day, I don't do quite as much of all that type of work anymore because it was pulling me away from my first love, which is painting. But putting your business cap on and understanding how to run your business. And then I also kind of folding into business, this little quote that I came up with: pitch your tent under the shadow of a great edifice. And so that goes for business and it also goes for being an artist. So hit your wagon to a star type of thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to copy anybody, but it means, for instance, when I was really coming up in Twitter and all those days where I was building myself, and I ended up being one of the top 100 women in the world on Twitter for a short bit. And
Wow.
just that whole world back in the 2012, that kind of era, I would follow like, okay, what brands do I think are really doing a good job out there online? And had nothing to do with art. And I would follow Burger King. Like, what are they doing? What colors do they use? What, da, 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 da. And so we can learn a lot from businesses and other artists that are doing a good job. I would say that all is some good sound advice that I've learned at this stage in life.
I
And
think
then
it's, sorry, go ahead.
have your own voice. You find
Hmm.
your voice as an artist and as a business person as well.
Yeah, well, have your own voice. We hear that all the time, but you're the first person who ever mentioned that the business side of it is important because if you want to make it as a full-time artist, if you don't understand the business side, you're just gonna fail, right? You might
You
have the
really
best
have
art in the
to.
world, you're not going to get anywhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So,
be professional when you're out there and take care of yourself and be a good advocate for yourself and put on your professional hat when you go deal with businesses and galleries and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
put your
In
best
some
foot
ways,
forward.
maybe the artists out there who are thinking of becoming professional artists, they should take a couple business courses to see how boring it is to be involved in that part of it. But
Yes.
it would tremendously help them without a doubt, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
fantastic. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, the last question is, what is the top piece of advice you would give others?
Well, it all kind of folds in with that. But then we discussed it a little bit. That old Picasso saying, what did he say? I thought I had it written down somewhere here. Oh, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And so I always say, learn the rules so you can break them. And I think that's really good advice as well, because you touched on that too when I said that I'm intuitive when I paint and I approach a painting fairly intuitively. I do within boundaries and structure. And so learn those rules, gang. Get out there, get your paints, learn how to draw, learn how to mix color, understand temperature, follow artists who you admire, who inspire you, even if it's just the way they put paint down and maybe not what they're painting. Like I took those abstract classes, take some business classes, and learn the rules, and then you can start to break them and make it more interesting.
And with that, I just want to say thank you very much. I've been following
Thank
you
you.
forever, and it's really nice to talk to you. I can't believe how
Nice to
similar
chat with you.
we are.
No, I
It's
love it.
mind-boggling. I can hardly wait to ever meet you in person because I'm sure we'll just probably chat for hours. I mean,
Well, feel
this
free
is,
to reach out. We'll continue the
I got
conversation.
to make it down to Idaho now.
Yes, definitely. And hi to everybody out there. And I wish I could answer everyone. And I see familiar faces. Thanks for being here.
Yep. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for Lori for attending. I really appreciate it. And until next time, we'll say good night, everyone. Cheers.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
And I think that's where I've been able to help others in my own little way. And, with my blog over the years and social media, training people back in the day, I don't do quite as much of all that type of work anymore because it was pulling me away from my first love, which is painting. But being a good, putting your business cap on and understanding how to run your business, and then I also kind of folding into business, pitch this little quote that I came up with: pitch your tent under the shadow of a great edifice. And so that goes for business, and it also goes for being an artist. So hitch your wagon to a star type of thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to copy anybody, but it means, for instance, when I was really coming up in Twitter and all those days where I was building myself, and I ended up being one of the top 100 women in the world on Twitter for a short bit. And just that whole world back in the 2012, that kind of era. But I would follow, like, okay, what brands do I think are really doing a good job out there online, and had nothing to do with art. And I would follow Burger King. Like, what are they doing? What colors do they use? What, da, 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 da. And so we can learn a lot from businesses and other artists that are doing a good job. And so I would say that all is some good sound advice that I've learned at this stage in life.
I
And
think
then
it's, sorry, go ahead.
have your own voice. You find your voice as an artist and as a business person as well.
Yeah, well, have your own voice. We hear that all the time, but you're the first person who ever mentioned that the business side of it is important, because if you want to make it as a full-time artist, if you don't understand the business side, you're just going to fail, right? You might have the
really
best
have
art in the
to.
world. You're not going to get anywhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And be professional when you're out there, and take care of yourself. Be a good advocate for yourself, and put on your professional hat when you go deal with businesses and galleries and
yeah. In some ways, maybe the artists out there who are thinking of becoming professional artists, they should take a couple business courses to see how boring it is to be involved in that part of it. It would tremendously help them, without a doubt, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. That's great.
Yeah.
Now, the last question is, what is the top piece of advice you would give others?
Well, it all kind of folds in with that, but then we discussed it a little bit. That old Picasso saying, what did he say? I thought I had it written down somewhere here. Oh, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And so I always say, learn the rules so you can break them. And I think that's really good advice as well, because you touched on that too when I said that I'm intuitive when I paint, and I approach a painting fairly intuitively. I do, within boundaries and structure. And so learn those rules, gang. Get out there, get your paints, learn how to draw, learn how to mix color, understand temperature, follow artists who you admire, who inspire you, even if it's just the way they put paint down and maybe not what they're painting. Like I took those abstract classes, take some business classes, and learn the rules, and then you can start to break them and make it more interesting. And
with that, I just want to say thank you very much. I've been following you forever, and it's really nice to talk to you. I can't believe how similar we are.
I know, I love it.
Mind-boggling. I can hardly wait to ever meet you in person, because I'm sure we'll just probably chat for hours. I mean,
well, feel free to reach out. We'll continue the conversation.
I got to make it down to Idaho now.
Yes, definitely. And hi to everybody out there. And I wish I could answer everyone. And I see familiar faces. Thanks for being here.
Yep. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for Lori for attending. I really appreciate it. And until next time, we'll say good night, everyone. Cheers.
All right. Good night.